Welcome to Running It Back, the Lessons Learned from Sports podcast. Very special episode today where we're joined by Professor Lou Moore, who has written a really great book called The Great Black Hope. What's the post-colonic?
Doug Williams, Vince Evans, and the making of the black quarterback.
There you go. And that's Lou talking. And I'm joined here, as always, by Tarlin. Tarlin, how you doing today?
You're burying the lead. We have a guest. We're
Well,
not
I mean,
making up people that we have. We often make up assistants that work for us and
yeah.
we have call in, but we actually have a guest.
And
All
he's
right,
already talked. I didn't bury any lead. I realize we're all working through our feelings. This is 2 days after the election. So I might even allow a little bit of Tarlin's animosity towards me to make it through to the edit. But Lou, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I had Lou on, I think it was 2021, Lou. It was a couple years ago. I had him on my education podcast talking about his books. You want to just run through your other titles? And we're going to spend our time talking about The Great Black Hope. But I know you've written other books about sports history and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I have two other books. One, I Fight for a Living, which is about black manhood in boxing from 1880 to 1915. And the other one is We Will Win the Day, which is about the civil rights movement and the black athlete. And then I also have two audibles for the great courses. So one is like just the whole shot, it's African-American athletes who made history. And then the other one's specifically about the Negro League. So it's called A Pastime of Our Own.
Yeah, and I think we both, Tarlin, you listened to this one too, right? They're all on Audible.
I listened to the Great Black Hope on Audible. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So it's available on Audible for those of you who do subscribe there. Also, the book's available and you can see it over Lou's shoulder if you're watching this on YouTube. But Tarlin, you are our notorious prepper. Anything you want to kick off with?
Yeah, before we get started, in fall election, this is not a politics show. You and I have our chance to text. We want whoever's in office to succeed, and we'll talk more about that later. But post-election, you have some interesting facts. You're leaving Sacramento, if I'm not mistaken, and you voted for two interesting people. One, a sports hero of mine, and if
Yeah.
you look over my shoulder, that signed ball is from him.
Oh,
My
okay.
favorite
Yes,
point
nice.
guard of all time, and an actor. So can you let us know, before we get into the book, two guys that you voted for mayor and governor before you left the great state of California?
Yeah, so you must have been listening to the Black Athlete podcast the other day. So I did vote for Kevin Johnson as mayor. I'll admit that, and in Sacramento. And so when I left Sacramento in 2008, it was like, oh, we don't want to talk. It's the market, right? The housing collapse and everything like that. So there's some bad times there for other folks. But KJ, I think was supposed to usher in some good stuff. I think he got the arena built though, right? I don't know.
he
I
did.
left, so I don't know anything about what happened after that. And I did not vote for Arnold Schwarzenegger. I voted for Gary Coleman. So if that's what people were thinking, yeah, why not? I was leaving the state, and why not? It was either him, I believe it was Mary Carey, who was a professional actress at that time, not in any movies that you guys should be watching. Cruz Bustamante, who was a politician, and I want to say Ariana Huffington, right? And that
Oh,
was
wow.
kind of, so the vote was yes or no on recall. And if it happens to be a recall, who do you want? So there's like a twofer right there. So that was
All right,
it,
sure.
right?
Arnold
pull you down-
Drummond. Arnold
Not to
Drummond.
pull you
represent-
down the gutter, but there have been votes recently for D's nuts. So
Yeah.
we'll
I saw that in North Carolina. So but
we will keep this clean.
Right.
So appreciate that. I just want to, as a Cali guy, I do remember KJ. Michelle Rhee, for those in it, it's been a long time education, is his wife, did a lot of stuff in the education space. All right. So Great Black Hope. What sparked the book? Why now? For us, we're constantly covering black quarterbacks. We've talked a lot about Justin Fields coming out of the draft. So bring us into your thinking. What sparked this as your latest book idea?
yeah, so I was, always like black quarterbacks and I always write about the black athlete, right? The main thing is to really tell the story of American history through the lens of the black athlete. And so as we talked about the books at the lead, you kind of get, if you add up all my books, it's like the 20th century, right, of U.S. history. And so it's the pandemic. I had nothing to do besides watch my kids all day. And I was like, I want to start writing this book or start thinking about this book about the black quarterback. And so I just started to kick ideas around because I knew this one couldn't be A to Z. And I can do that. It'd just be like really fat and thick. And others did that in the time in between when I started to write my book and it came out. But what I wanted to do was tell a story, like a nice little tight narrative, and then think about who could fit in that story I mean, obviously, when you do that, if you're trying to sell to a trade press, you got to have like something really big, right? Like, believe me, I would love to write a book on like Jeff Blake or something like that, right? Or Aaron Brooks, but that's
Yeah,
not
And that was the next, that
yeah,
was my fantasy football corollary to Jeff Blake. Yeah.
right, right, right. But that's not selling, right? And no offense to Jeff Blake, right? Like I collect his cards and stuff like that. And Doug made sense, but I'm also somebody who's kind of like I like underdogs. I like writing about people who you've never heard of, right? So
Yeah.
even if you read those other two books, you'll get the main characters like Jack Johnson or Jackie Robinson or Muhammad Ali, but then you'll also get the people you've never heard of, or in Vince Evans's case, right? You heard of him, he was
Mhm.
exciting, but I don't know anything about him. And so that's as a writer, that's what you want to do. I want you to feel like, oh my gosh, this guy could be good, right? Just how we like Jeff Blake or Aaron Brooks, and then when you look at it, it's like, yeah, okay, they're okay, right? And that's what I wanted to do with this story. So I chose these two guys, and the reason why I chose them is because everything synced up perfectly, right? They're both born in 1955. They're both born in the South, and then they went their separate ways, right? Whereas Doug
Mhm.
goes to Grambling, an all-black school. Vince goes to USC, right? But
Right.
they both played for the greatest coaches ever, like two of the greatest coaches ever. And then so I'm like, this is a great story. And you can kind of track their careers, and they're two different quarterbacks, even though they're
Mhm.
black. And so I can really talk about everything I want to talk about just through these two guys. And so
Yeah.
started that process in 2020, and here we are in 2024, right? That's the end
Yeah.
product.
And it's cool that their stories kind of weave together on the field too, right? They wind up playing each other a few different times that you talk about in the book, which is cool. And then the context in which they're playing, it all kind of is building towards the Doug Williams story. But you also go way back because you are a historian. I was happy we had talked about Charlie Thrower before on the show, which is just a great name.
Yeah. Willie
Or
Thrower. Willie
Willie
Thrower.
Thrower.
Yeah.
There you
Yeah.
go. There you go. You're
It's
the
Willie
historian.
Thrower and then
It's that
Charlie Choo Choo Brackens. Yeah.
it's that
Exactly.
3.5x
I
Palmer,
may have been
audible
listening.
day.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I'm gonna do any seizures listening to the book at the speed that I did. But yeah, I mean, anything from that perspective too, because you do kind of cover breaking in, where there was a really different context in the, 40s and the 50s versus even, there's a progression up to really the 70s and the 80s, which is really the focus for the two principles in the book. But maybe going way back, was there anything that kind of surfaced or any context you think is important for people understanding the full arc of this history?
Yeah, so part of the thing that I'm doing here is like there's two lives, right? There's two guys in one position. So that's the story, right? So there's actually two stories here. There's
Mhm.
there's the story on Doug and Vance, and then there's the story on the quarterback position, which, you can get to that a little bit quicker because people know, but that first chapter is all about the beginning of really the quarterback becoming the most important person on the field, right? And
Right.
so briefly talk about the single wing is if you guys are listeners are football heads, you have to be really, really, really old to know what the single wing is. Cause I don't think anybody runs it today, probably not even high school. And if they
Yeah.
do, it's a coach who thinks he's smarter than everyone else is like,
Trying to be a
I'm gonna
gimmick.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna pull out a gimmick that nobody has seen in a long time. So
Wait, but just to be clear, Lou, we almost did a show about the Galloping Ghost. We almost did a Red Grange
yeah,
episode,
yeah.
which still may happen. That's like right in this kind of historical period.
Right. So Red Grange is like what his big game was 100 years ago, right? That
That's
that game
right.
against Michigan. And I think that's the time from what I read, a Red Grange book this semester, because I want to teach my students. And I think that's the time they started adding like I want to say like counters and stuff like that to the offense. But it's still
Mhm.
pretty much the same, like a single wing
Running game.
where
Yeah.
the main guy is the runner and passes. If you are passing, they are like deep
Plus the ball's
balls.
bigger. Ball's
The
bigger
Yeah.
too.
ball is huge,
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
right, right, and so you're throwing a basketball, right, to
Right.
somebody, 40 yards in the air. But, the original question you asked, like, kind of the stuff I found is one of the things is, like, just really centering Kenny Washington as this important person in this history. So, most of us talk about Willie Thrower being the first guy, and that's still debatable in the sense that what's modern to football. But for me, I say it's Kenny Washington because he's the first black quarterback to play as a T formation quarterback in the pros.
Mm.
And so that's part of the book, transitioning from the single wing to the T. And when Kenny integrates football, reintegrates the NFL in 1946, they bring him on as a quarterback, which makes sense because in college he was a quarterback at the single wing. But again, they're hiking to Kenny like in the shotgun. and he's probably running, if we watch films, he's probably running 70 to 80% of the time, or they're handing it off. But he also has a powerful arm. But when he gets there to the Rams in 46, they try to make him a T formation quarterback. And those are two separate positions. And to me, the struggles that he has and that he's like, this is like learning Chinese, tells me that this is a modern position because he's the best single, well, probably one of the best single wing quarterbacks ever, right? To that point, especially in college, right? And then all of a sudden he struggles with this new position. And that's why I'm like, this is modern football.
Mm.
And then there's a couple guys that we've never heard of, like Alva Tabor, who played for the New York Yankees back when there was a professional team called the New York Yankees, but he never got
Football,
in.
yeah.
Yeah, football team. And then comes Willie Thrower and then Charlie Choo Choo Brackens. And so part of chapter 1 is setting up the story of the quarterback, but also these first kind of pioneers who are playing that position as T formation guys.
Mm-hmm. And then moving forward, Marlon Briscoe was someone I hadn't really heard about. I thought he was kind of interesting. You're almost flipping the script for us. We typically think about what's going on today and kind of bring it back to what was going on back in the day. But it does seem like some of these guys, because Briscoe was like a shorter guy who moved around a
Yeah,
lot.
about 5'10". So he's the first black quarterback to start in modern, we'll keep saying modern football, right? Because Fritz Pollard played in the 1920s and was a quarterback, but he's not a quarterback. It's what we think of. He's a single wing guy. So it's not
Played the position, but
yeah,
wasn't really throwing the
right.
ball or doing
Not
the
the same thing. I mean, even when he threw, it's not the same thing, right?
Yep.
And so Briscoe, like you said, he's 5'10". He's a scrambler. And so I mean, we don't have to talk about editing, but Briscoe, like the original idea of the book's like, I'm walking you from point A to point B, and Briscoe has a lot in there, but you don't want to, kind of derail everything, get everybody off off track and stuff like that. And so
Yeah.
Briscoe comes in much later after I edit the book, and he's going to come in the chapter where Vince Evans is drafted in 1977, even though Briscoe plays in 68, because I wanted to talk about the dynamics of having a scrambler, a smaller guy, but a scrambler at quarterback.
Yeah. But then what I was mentioning before, I'm looking forward to the screenplay. I will watch it on whatever streamer or even in a big studio, big cinema, wherever you play it. But it does feel like if you started this as a screenplay, you would probably start with the game in the 70s. I think that's where you're kind of introducing where the two of them, Vince Evans for the Bears and Doug Williams for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the They Call Me Bruce. So, orange outfit with the Buccaneer on the helmet. They're playing each other. Can you kind of set the stage for that? Because I do think that is kind of when you really are first introducing the book. I feel like you're beginning with that.
Right. So yeah, we call those Bucs jerseys the creamsicle jerseys.
Yes.
Us cool kids.
Nice.
But that book starts September 30th, 1979, and that's a game where the first game where two modern black quarterbacks start against each other in the NFL. And so I'm setting it up to set up this idea that it's perhaps one of the most important games. And I think as we continue on and there's more and more black quarterbacks in the league, I think we started this year at 15. Probably next year will be around the same, but
Which is half, right? I mean,
right,
like,
which is half. Right. And then eventually we'll be at like 2/3 and stuff like that. And then we can look back at this game and say, okay, this is it. And so I wanted to set this up because they are, like I said, two guys, similar backgrounds, and then things kind of change a little bit and they're different type of quarterbacks. And we have that today. So part of the things I try to do, and you guys are really smart readers or listeners on the Audible, it's like, here's the history, and then you can make the connections on your own, but in the publishing world, it's like, oh, you have to make those connections for us.
Right. You be overt.
Yeah. Very overt. So I try to do that in the epilogue, but I was like, I think readers are very smart and they get what's going on here and they could kind of make those conclusions themselves. And we've talked before on the education pod. And that's part of what you do with teaching is hope that the students can make those conclusions themselves. And you realize sometimes they can't. So we have to have just different extra assignments for that, just quick assignments and stuff like that. But that was what I was really trying to do, is just set this book up to say, this is the future of the NFL. And I have this, I think the second paragraph in the beginning of the introduction is about going to commercial in that 79 game. And it's about Ford and Ford is selling the future. Right. And so to me, it's like, oh my God, it's this aha moment when you're sitting there watching the game for the 100th time. Like, this Ford commercial comes at this great time. And it's selling like hybrid cars and turbine engines, all this stuff that's going to help them change into the future and the kind of
Yeah.
stuff that we have now. So everything just kind of goes together.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to cut Palmer off. Marlon, magician, Briscoe, as I was reading about him, and I do want to ask sort of modern quarterbacks and who do you think, but I mean, I was picturing Kyler Murray,
Right.
just 5'10", super fast. So that's one comp. Second, and picking the two quarterbacks, I want to ask you about this, 'cause you mentioned 15 of 32 to start the year, starting quarterbacks. If you don't get this in Trivial Pursuit, or you would get your black card revoked if you can't mention, who Doug Williams' first black card win the Super Bowl. But what's interesting is Vince Evans in his arc, but there are 10 of the 32 quarterbacks are backups, black backup quarterbacks. So
Okay.
that to me was interesting as well from Vince. It's not only that you can start, but actually you can have a black quarterback as your second, as someone that can be in the QB room. So can you talk a little about, I felt like it was an imprint just on the whole room, not just on the QB1, but also you can carry more black quarterbacks so they can actually help the team. That was what was super interesting to me about Vince.
Yeah, and I hope people get it without me having to say it. And then I think in the epilogue it come through and say like,
Yeah.
you're backup. But that was the point, right? Like most guys, they're not up until Vince. The other guys, you're really not keeping around. Like they kept James Harris around, but and there's several reasons why. One is just racial stereotypes of the
Yeah.
moment, right? That is to say, if this guy is not starting, like why sit him for 3 years? Because listeners have to know, like when you watch modern football today, you draft a guy, you play a guy, and then you see what you got just because of the way contracts work out. Back then, it was like, okay, we're going to draft a guy and then we'll sit him for 3 years unless we have to. And they would say, well, why am I going to sit this guy for 3 years if he's running a 4.5 40? I'm just going to make him a cornerback or a receiver, and that's that, right? And oh, you don't want to play? Bye. Go to Canada or don't play
Right.
at all.
It happened to Tony Dungy.
Right. It happened same draft. And shout out to Tony for getting that wrong on that documentary on Amazon Prime, where I think he puts himself in the Doug Williams draft and the Warren Moon draft. I was like, no, you're in the Vince Evans draft. You're in the year before. But it does happen to Tony, right? Like he's a very good quarterback. He played at Minnesota. I forget the offensive system. Like before I edited it down, there was a lot on Tony Dungy, so I had it memorized. I knew
Right.
like who was looking at him and where he ranked scout wise and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But that's it. And so the thing with Vince, what's so powerful is like they draft him. He's a well-known figure. So they draft him in 77. He went same year. He's Pac 8 player of the year.
He's coming out of like pretty
USC.
glamorous USC program.
Right, right.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
helps a lot because it's the visibility of it. And so if you think about all the other black quarterbacks that played before him, they don't have that visibility, right? That to get a shot. Because Marlon Briscoe was at a small NAIA school, Omaha, Nebraska. Joe Gillum was at Tennessee State. James Harris was at Grambling.
Mhm.
So those guys aren't, who are these
Yeah.
other guys, right?
Doug Williams is Grambling too. Right?
Grambling
Yeah.
too, right? And so Vince sits his year, but what Vince does, and this is why this is why he's one of the most important players, right? And maybe one day he'll too get in the Hall of Fame, but he hasn't put in his contract, when he signs his rookie contract, you can't put me to another position without my permission. You can't make that change. Now, his rookie year, he does change positions, but it's on his own. He's like, I want to play, so I'll be a kick returner. But
Yeah.
the next years, I'm a quarterback and I'm a quarterback only. And so he sticks around for 3 years. So it's not until that 79 season, like when Doug and Vince play against each other, that he actually gets a real shot to start. Like
Mhm.
78, they bring him in for kind of some packages, like let him run around once or twice, and that's
Kind of
it.
like Cordell Stewart-ish.
Kind of like a very Cordell slash, right? But they're not letting him be a receiver. They're just here. So that's what's happening. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to be a backup, because like they're like, get out of here or play a different position. But the other thing is they really feared about this kind of racial animosity, right? That from cities. So the one way to think about it is like when the black quarterback's coming up, whether it's Briscoe or Harris, it's also rebellion season, right? It's also kind of right. All the rebellions are happening. So when a
Right.
brief story I tell is, and I want to say I haven't memorized the book, but I want to say I do this in like it's in chapter 4, I think. But it's about what was going on, right? And Eldridge Dickey, who is one of the best quarterbacks in the 1960s, regardless of where he went, goes to Tennessee State, a black school, gets drafted by the Raiders. in 1968 in the first round, and they switched him to receiver. And the moment black folks in Oakland hear about that, they're like, "Oh, we're going to boycott you. Wait,
Mhm.
you're not going to play. You're not going to do this." And in 68, that stuff's scary because in 68, if you're white
Yeah.
in Oakland, that means, oh, they might burn this down. That's how their mind
Yeah.
works. And so
Right.
there's a lot of owners thinking about, like, as an excuse, like, if I draft this guy and don't play this guy, now I got these black fans complaining because all the teams are in black neighborhoods, right? I mean, it's the city, right? And so they, they worry about these kind of things.
What
And
about the flip side, having Cap on your team?
yeah, yeah, they should have Cap on their team. Every team
So I'm
should
just
have
saying, the
Cap.
flip side, having Cap on your team, it's white fans would be involved. But keep
Right,
sorry.
right. Well, they don't think about that, right? Like all the hate mail these guys get. Like if you're a black quarterback, it's over, right? Like it's
Mhm.
it's hate mail this, hate mail that, and it's kind of the same thing. One of my favorite lines in the book comes from the LA Times sports writer Jim Murray. I throw it in the introduction, and he says, "Look, being a black quarterback is like being a member of the bomb squad. You only get one mistake."
Mm.
And I think that's the other thing. That's what people have to worry about. And so to be able to be, as you said, so many backups today, that's a big thing. And that's really Vince, right? Because
Mhm.
he's a career backup. He had aspirations to start, doesn't start, goes away. But when he comes back with the Raiders starting the 87 season, that's his
It's
life. He's just a career
yeah.
backup.
Right.
And so can
I
you
don't
dig a little, because you're starting to touch a little bit on the black QB syndrome. Can you explain that to everyone, what you're touching on a little bit?
Yeah. So I say it a couple times in this book. So it's called the black quarterback syndrome, or some, if you're a little older, color quarterback syndrome. We don't say that anymore. But there's two meanings to this. It's the one hand, it's the stuff we've been talking about. The black quarterback gets drafted, he doesn't get a play because he's black, and all these racial stereotypes. But then there's this other meaning, and to me, that's why this book is so important, because it's not just the quarterback, it's the fans, right, who are watching, right? Because part of the push for to have a black quarterback is that a lot of black folks see this as this is part of the civil rights movement, right? And part of the civil rights movement is not just integration, is that you're gonna have opportunity in life, that
Yeah.
that merit's gonna matter. That okay, if I go to school, I get these good grades, I work hard, then I'll be able to climb this ladder. And racism says no. But when you see this black quarterback, you realize that that's you, right? Because of everything the black quarterback has to go through, and understanding that if he's there, he's really good, right? So imagine being a black fan watching in the 60s and 70s, seeing all these guys play on Saturday and dominate, right? Whether it's Jimmy Ray at Michigan State or Condris Holloway at Tennessee, and then realize that they're not going to get that shot in the pros. And you're like, that's me. And there's this really good article in 1983 when Vince Evans leaves Chicago. It's from a black woman who writes for the Chicago Tribune. And she's like, this is the black quarterback syndrome. And then she's like, she writes this piece, and it's not even about Vince Evans. It's about all these black professionals
Mhm.
for years have had the same thing happen to them. And it's, to me, it's like, oh, this is the aha moment, right? Like I get it now. I've seen black writers talking about the black quarterback in the 50s and 60s and why it's important. And then for someone to clearly tie this in 83 when Vince Evans leaves, right?
Mhm.
And to me, at that moment, you realize that this is not just about your team winning. This is about you.
Yeah, and it's also another reason to dislike Jim McMahon if folks already had that propensity because, it's not just the black quarterback, it's also the white quarterbacks who are getting that chance. Yeah, he did win a Super Bowl, but, again, reading between the lines, it does sound like had Vince had that shot with that team and that defense, that there was a real opportunity there. Ditka is features pretty prominently. Mike Ditka, the coach of the Bears at the time. That was the thing that was interesting to me, sadly in today's context, just understanding how some of the overt racism or sort of subtler racism that kind of existed in the 70s and the 80s, we're now seeing some of those threads kind of resurface. But at the same time, it's kind of refreshing that we're at least past the Al Campanis and the Jimmy the Greek phase of racism as it relates to sports. How do you think about that as a historian? How do you kind of then take us back to the present day, especially with your students who are, especially in light of the recent election and kind of the run up to it, folks are kind of shook, understandably. And then your book, I think, is giving them some historical context. How do you kind of bring that to the present day in your class or maybe for our listeners?
Like present day, like what happened 2 days ago, present day?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're trying to get
Uh,
downloads, like whatever you want to
yeah.
talk about.
No, I would say this. I would say this. There's things you can and can't and shouldn't say in the classroom, right? And so I read the room. We've been in the class long enough to know what class would like to have a conversation about the election and what class wouldn't.
Mhm.
We'll just be clear. So I have a civil rights class that meets at 10 in the morning, and you can tell that everybody's like, oh, it's just been a rough moment for them. And then I
Yeah.
have a sports history class at 11 o'clock in the morning. You can tell that some of them are doing quite well, right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do this, right? But in the civil rights class, but then you never know, right? And you can face complaints all the time. So you talk about pop culture. I came in there, we just played Tevin Campbell Tomorrow. And I infused it in with because Quincy had just passed. And I was like,
Yeah.
Tarlin might understand this because he's from the LA area. And I was telling my class when the South Central Rebellion happened, I believe it's 92.3. That's what I told the class. I could be wrong. But they looped that song almost all day.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, this is it. And I tried to explain to him, like, well, why do you think they would play this song? What's going on? So without saying like, hey, I know you're hurt and stuff like that, and trying to
Yeah.
intruding on that, let's just listen to some Tevin Campbell Tomorrow. And this is what I felt when I was 14 when I heard it for the first time. And this is why it's like a song of healing and stuff like that. And then, it's a
Mm.
civil rights class. So there is kind of a lot of like beloved community in this. We're all kind of one and stuff like that. And then
Right.
since we were talking about the vote in the class, to put in, I play a lot of music to put in that John Legend song, with Common, was it One Day or whatever? It's the same type of thing, right? It's just kind of very uplifting song, whereas there's a little bit more protest in that song. In another class, you just go on like, nothing happened because you could tell it's like, it's
Yeah.
probably 50-50 in that class. But
Because I was trying to figure out like if we were to connect Kamala Harris to a black quarterback, we make those types of
yeah,
connections sometimes, and like even the fact that she may not have won the election, but like the fact that she made it to that place to be part of the national conversation, the global conversation. Even if it is a defeat, in some ways, it is something to build on. And that is a place where there perhaps are some connections.
it's that Jim Murray quote. She had to be perfect, right?
Mhm.
And there are no mistakes. And if you make one mistake, it's done. Like that,
Yeah,
as a black woman or a woman of color, right? Running this election. And so part of it is like when you look at some of the, we don't need to get too deep into the weeds, but if you look at some of the complaints, well, she didn't do this, she didn't do that, this. And I'm like, this dude over here,
yeah,
right? Through five, it's Nathan Peterman, right? Like replacing Tyrod Taylor, he threw 5 interceptions and F you to the crowd. And you're like, you know what?
Zach
We're gonna run
Wilson.
with it, right? Like it's that,
yeah,
yeah, right. And it's like, okay, wait a minute here, like, and that's it, right? And that's the career of the black quarterback coming up. Like, there are no mistakes. Like, and you guys said you've talked about Justin Fields. He doesn't get any mistakes when he was with the Bears. And
yeah,
what we see now, what I've always said, like, because I wanted him to succeed, and he's like one of the last quarterbacks I mentioned in the book, because he was the quarterback of the Bears when I was writing this book, not Caleb. It's not him, right? It's the
mhm,
coach. And now
mhm.
people are like, well, coach has got to go. Like, duh, the coach,
Yeah.
like, duh. Or with Young. Look how inept that franchise is, right?
Right,
Like the
right.
Carolina Panthers. They traded away CMC. They traded away DJ Moore. They give this guy nothing.
No,
Yeah,
no
And then they bring him
weapons.
in. And
Yeah.
then Andy Dalton had one good game against an awful, awful Raiders team.
Held
My
my
biggest
fantasy team
mistake.
that week.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you pick up Andy Dalton?
We got Tua got hurt, so I had to pick up all Dalton that week, and he went for
That's
30 points.
desperation. You must be in a
Yeah.
20-team league. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I picked up the Raiders defense.
Well,
Like,
it's a super
yeah.
flex, so 2
Okay.
quarterback league. So you got
Oh, okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
All right.
This is why he's a Kevin Johnson fan. We see this coming out, right? Like here, he's always the super flex league. But anyway, like, right, Dalton's not. He had one good game, but after that, it's just not good. So they had to like, oh yeah, we made a mistake. And then what do? They traded receiver number one, who they traded for this year, right? They traded him from the Steelers, and they traded him away to Baltimore, and then they just traded away
Jonathan Mingo.
Mingo, who they picked last year in the second round. It's like, yeah, you made a mistake, right? And now, but Bryce he gets everything from it, right? It's not the quarterback guru coach is clearly awful, right? It's
Right.
not the GM who's the architect of all this stuff, right? It's the black quarterback who has to, deal with all this stuff. Like Bryce Young had to be perfect, and he's kind of undersized, so he would have had to be really good anyway. But that's how it goes with these guys, right?
Yeah.
And Caleb's getting it for the first time in his life. He's getting a little bit. He got a taste of that at USC, but his numbers were so gaudy it didn't matter. But he's got a little taste because he was a little bit.
His last year, he was a
He's
little more
Gen
erratic.
Z, right? And I think
Yeah.
people were uncomfortable with him being a Gen Z guy. I think
What
that's
are you doing painting your fingernails and stuff? What's going on, brother?
wearing bringing a purse and crying, and so he was already there. But now I think he's so Gen Z and he's so into being successful his whole life, and he's probably been told like this doesn't matter, race doesn't matter, race doesn't matter, race doesn't matter. He
Right.
probably doesn't realize that you can, and I truly believe this, you can't divorce that history of what the black quarterback went through from the criticism you're going to receive, right? Every
Yeah.
quarterback gets criticism, but I think because this history is just so deep and so nasty, I don't know if we can divorce that. And now he's realizing that, and I think in real time. And so he's getting a little help because his coach is awful, but it's coming down on him pretty hard because Jaden Daniels is so great. Drake
Right.
May turns out to be looking okay. Bo Nix is like kind of up and down, but his team's still winning.
Looks like a
So
good class. Yeah.
So I got 2 questions. You started doing with Bryce Young, just get your take on whether or not they're getting a chance, the right organization behind them. This is to remind you of quarterbacks in the past. But one main question, something that stood out for me, and you said your aha moment was in 1983 around Black QB syndrome. But my aha moment was when you realize that Skip Bayless has always been an asshole.
you see how I put that in there? And
Oh my
I
God.
literally was like, I
Yeah, yeah.
rewound. I go,
Yeah.
is that the Skip Bayless? Skip
Yeah, he
Bayless? Oh, that was amazing. Thank you for that. As he was talking about Doug Williams and trying to compliment him, but he wasn't. And so the media plays a role. Not only the coaches and the organization set up, but the media absolutely plays a role in sort of the growth of the black quarterback. But we talked about Bryce Young, Justin Fields. You already said didn't get a fair shake from the Bears. Anthony Richardson, he just got
Yeah.
benched.
Yeah. I think he's the last quarterback I mentioned in the book because he was so intriguing. Number
Mhm.
4 pick. He is like the Vince Evans, right? And maybe a little bit bigger than Vince.
Where
Like
do you
this-
think his career go?
I hope it goes well because I got a bunch of his rookie cards. Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't collect cards if you're not ready for the roller coaster ride. Look, here's the thing. When they drafted him, they knew he had limited experience. They knew it was going to be a project. And when you do that, you have to be willing to be patient. They were not patient, right? They just rushed him in there. And okay, fine. If you're going to do that, then you have to know there's going to be some ups and there are going to be some downs. And for them to go off and say, well, we're going to go on this direction. Come on now. Like, I think it's the beauty of Lamar Jackson too, that if you draft Anthony Richardson, then that's your quarterback and your team looks like you're building around that. Like to have Joe Flacco there and bring him in, or to have Gardner or Gardner Minshew the year before, it's
Totally different
telling me
offense. It's like
Yeah.
you're
Right.
totally flipping.
You're not committed. You're not
Don't
committed from the get-go.
underestimate the power of Flacomania. I mean,
Man,
that's a
right,
whole
yeah.
nother
Yeah.
episode. you
But
know?
it's a whole different thing. Like
Yeah.
either you commit to the style or you don't. The reason why the Baltimore Ravens are so good is because the moment they got Lamar and he took over for Joe Flacco, it's like, we're going to commit to this style. And it
Ozzie
takes
Newsome.
time,
Ozzie
right?
Newsome,
Right. You
Harbaugh.
have to build. And so Anthony Richardson will be fine, but Anthony Richardson has to be in an offense that's totally for Anthony Richardson. And this is the power of the black quarterback. You have to do the work. I'm not saying Anthony Richardson didn't do the work, but go back and read, or if Anthony Richardson is a listener to this or anyone who knows him, just put it on Audible 3.5 speed and go back to the Vince Evans USC senior year days where you had to kick him out of the film, right? And same thing with the Bears when he was
Had
starting.
to learn to
right?
stop throwing the
Yeah.
ball so hard.
Gotta
The
learn these
laces.
things. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's Anthony. Because if you watch him, I might even said something 2-3 years ago when I saw him first day, like a comparison to Vince Evans. I probably did.
Yeah.
But I'm not on Twitter as much. I am on Twitter a lot, but I'm not anymore.
Right.
Yesterday was kind of I should probably be off.
Yeah.
It's
Too bad, because you
I've
did a
done the
nice job.
damage.
You built a real platform there for those of us who
Yeah.
have been
I
following.
know
you.
it sucks because I got up to, I think I lost like 100 listeners or
Yeah.
viewers yesterday, but there's Blue Sky and there's Threads, but it's just,
It doesn't
it's
feel
not
the
the
same.
same, right?
Yeah.
It's like, because part of what made Twitter work was everybody was on at the same time. Right. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like I can get up in the
Yeah.
morning, people are on. Like Sky seems to be like more of academic-y.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with my academics, but
Right.
there's a set schedule and stuff like that. And so even like live sports, like it's
Yeah.
not the same.
It's also one of the things that I like about your Twitter is like you're like funny and surprising in real time. And like I feel like Blue Sky and some of these other platforms, people are trying to not say the wrong thing. And
Right.
I feel like it almost kind of, I understand why, but it does
Right.
feel like there was a level of like honesty that was on Twitter before it broke bad. Even though it was always kind of a cesspool, like you
It
could
was
find,
always,
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
But now it's even more like even
yeah,
like because they haven't because Tarlin doesn't know this apparently, but you can't funnel this stuff out anymore. And so if
yes,
I screen down, it's like, oh, here's a high school fight that I don't want to see. Here's something like
right,
my kids can't be on it. Like I can't
right,
scroll through it with my kids anymore because it's
yeah,
gonna be something bad. It's used for like professional stuff. You can create your own community, but you also can't too, right? And
right.
so there's good and there's bad to it. But I just think understanding how it's been used a couple years and where it's going for the next 4 years.
Are you going to Instagram though? I want to figure out where I can see like Cam Newton, like what he's wearing
Oh,
on
I got
first
it.
take,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then you
So
talking about who he is historically, like those.
that's my favorite thing in the world. I'm everywhere. Like Prof. More like Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, under the whole tag Prof.
Yeah.
More, kind of similar to that.
Okay.
I just gotta feel it out, right? Because it's you want to post where there's more people responding to that post, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So yeah, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
Instagram's tight because it's like family and family friends on there too. It's like, man, I
Correct.
don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And they
And
all
it's
they
like
all
my
know you.
neighbors on there.
Yeah, that's where we
So I
try
don't
to
do
keep we
that.
try to
Yeah.
keep this show like PG-13. The problem is by the time Darlin's girls are old enough for mature content, we'll be
Yeah.
suppressing it for my son. The other thing that is interesting to me is more like the context that they're coming into. You're talking about Anthony Richardson, like the front office in Indianapolis and then Indiana as a state, like that region, versus say like a CJ Stroud, who's playing now in Houston, which is probably a more receptive city for a black quarterback to really thrive. Same thing for Patrick Mahomes, where, even though there are challenges in Kansas City and the fact that they're still called the Chiefs, there's plenty we can talk about there. But, coming into the right environment, having the right support culture, having the right coach. You mentioned coaches a little bit, and there's some key ones you talk about in the book. Can you talk a little more about the environmental factors, like the support system that's necessary for folks to really change the way we think about things? Because it feels like Mahomes and Stroud are the two that come to my mind when you think about lifting all boats. The fact that those guys are succeeding, in some ways it's driven by the culture that they're coming into.
Right. So like I would add Jaden Daniels,
Yes, right.
Washington,
Jalen Hurts,
and then
they built a
Hurts,
whole
they built around him, Lamar built around him. So it's
Mhm.
like you got to come in. It's the Anthony Richardson discussion again. You got to come into the right situation. And so to bring it back to the book, it's John McKay, it's Eddie Robinson, and so Vince's career never really takes off because he doesn't have that coach who will believe in him, right? The coach who's going to be stable and do everything for him. Whereas Doug does well because he has John McKay. And then later on, when he's at Washington, it'll be Joe Gibbs, who was his OC for 1 year.
Right.
But it's like he has Don McKay and he had Eddie Robinson. And so if listeners don't know, Eddie Robinson, when he retired in the late 80s, all-time winningest coach in college football. He's at Grambling. I think he was on the top 25 this year for finalists for the Hall of Fame, for changes to the game or whatever thing they had, but he didn't make it. Doug's still on there for top 9. But it was his idea, it was his belief to say, you know what, I want to put a black quarterback in pro football. And so he changed everything in college, mid-60s, his offense to make sure these guys get a chance. So that's one, right? Support system. Then this John McKay, who, although he's running, primarily I formation at college and then a little pro style / I formation in the pros, he had black quarterbacks before and he understood what comes with that, right? It's not just, the production, it's like all the outside noise. And so he was the perfect character for Doug Williams because he took a lot of those arrows and he fired back, right? And so
Mhm.
when we're in that, we talked about, Tarlin brought up that Skip Bayless chapter. Skip comes up a couple of times in this book because with Skip's whole career, his whole career is the black athlete, right? His
Yeah.
first major article I think is writing about James Harris at the Los Angeles Rams. So he's right out of college, right out of Vanderbilt, right? And he's written some really good ones about Eddie Robinson, Vince Evans, and Doug Williams. But it's that Doug Williams stuff when he skips at Dallas and the team comes to Dallas and he I don't want to spoil it for listeners or future readers, just uses like Southern black jargon to like, to see how Doug talks and stuff like that. And by this time, McKay like fired back. He was like tired of it, like tired of like this kind of stuff from reporters, all the questions he got asked for about the black quarterback, and just like boom, had his back, right? And that's what you need, right? Someone that recognizes that this team is your team, and then they're gonna have your back, right? And I don't think right now Anthony Richardson has that. I thought he did last year. The fact that it went to Joe Flacco, the fact that they didn't have his back 2 weeks ago when he pulled himself out, let me know that this guy's just not ready for having Anthony Richardson. When you have an Anthony Richardson, that means you don't only have this guy who's a tremendous athlete, but you have a black quarterback.
Yeah.
And he's a great coach at Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, he was the OC to get Jalen Hurts to the Super Bowl, but he's not ready for this moment, right? Like putting in Flacco lets me know a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
So with that, and knowing that you need the organization around, we have a request because you're a dope writer, unbelievable researcher to be able to do this in COVID, to go deep. I can't imagine you going through treasure troves and trying to call libraries and stuff like that to get all the information you need. But we need you to do the coach, the black coach. We talk about all the time to the CEO of the organization
Every February.
do a show. Sleeping with the Enemy, Eric Bieniemy. We were on a rant for Bieniemy. Bieniemy may be a little bit of an asshole.
But now he's your neighbor, though, right?
Oh, that's right. He's COC. I forgot. I'm a Bruin fan. We're just terrible this year. So, but happy to have him. But there's something he said. There's a quarterback became more prominent on the field, so the CEO on the field, but it's the CEO that's managing everything around the team. That's just a request. I mean, you got other stuff floating, but we love to cover that. We're always fascinated by the coaches in the NBA. It looks much different in the NBA than it does in the NFL. Anyways, that's just something as you're talking.
Yeah. Any takes on quarterbacks and the connection between the black quarterback and the challenge around like the Rooney Rule, black head coaches, all that?
No, so I actually a couple years ago for First and Pin, I wrote this piece. It's called like Sometimes Next is Never. And it's about Eric Bieniemy, but it's also about the Rams had an OC back in the early 80s. It's supposed to be the next guy that never got a chance, right? And so it's about all these black guys who are supposed to get a chance at dawn. It's really the offensive guys, right? And so in Bieniemy was so interesting to me because like this guy's got 2 Super Bowls with the OC, and there's always this excuse, and then he went out on his own. I'm going to go to Washington. It's like, okay, that didn't work. And now he's at UCLA. And so he's done. He'll never, ever, ever get a chance to be a head coach. It's just, that's just how it works. Byron Leftwich is the same thing. He won a Super Bowl.
Right.
Like, where did he go? Where did he go after Tampa?
He's done. I don't know where he's at. He's not.
No one picked up Byron Leftwich?
I don't think he's the OC. We'd have to look that up. Right. So I don't think he's the OC anywhere. But that's to me, it's the offensive guys, not necessarily the defensive guys, because you look around the league, the guys who got hired, D'Amico Ryans, and then there's always Tomlin, who's been there forever. Last year, it was Ryans, it was Gerard Mayo, Antonio Pierce, right? All defense guys. So we're allowed, the black coach is allowed to be like this kind of very stern, rah-rah, like just aggressive come at you, but he's not allowed to be this offensive genius, right?
And then you bring in like the Kingsbury and like the
guy who got the job at the Panthers who's failing, right?
Canales,
right? Or even last year works with DC, the San Francisco 49ers, and they fired him, and now it's like, okay, whatever, because of something happened in the Super Bowl. Before that, he was the interim at Carolina Panthers, and that was the last time they were good. Like they were actually winning the game, even though they were trying to lose. Or in a situation that Houston set up 2 black coaches, Lovie Smith,
right,
and then David Culley, back-to-back years. They were trying to lose. It was a job that nobody wanted, but now it's like a turnaround job, right? And it went to Ryan, so it wound up going to a black guy. But for 2 other black guys who were never going to get a shot again, had to take that job.
Yeah. We're getting close to time here, Lou. Any cherry picking off your lightning round there, Tarlin, before we wrap up? And then maybe some final thoughts from you, Lou?
I'm distracted as a crack researcher trying to figure out what happened with Byron Leftwich. He won, since 2022.
Yeah.
Everyone has to read this. Audible. Sometimes I wish I like physical books because you can actually take notes. But it's a fantastic read. I can't wait to read your other 2 books. We'll send you the February when we talk about.
Yeah, we'll try to bring you back in February.
The black coaching carousel, because we like seeing what's happening. But it's been an honor to have you as our first guest. You're writing important things, and I even look forward to reading about Marlon Briscoe, run so fast that QBs can fly and we can rest. Things like that. You have a way with words, brother.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate it.
appreciate the time.
Real quick, listeners, when you read the book, make sure you rate the book. I'm told that kind of stuff helps. Listeners who might have just listened to it on Audible and stuff like that, 3.5 speed and stuff like that. I'm
We're
told
gonna
that
go
kind
on
of
a
stuff
rate.
helps.
My only regret, Lou, is that I only have 5 stars and a review to offer
Yes,
for you. If I could
yeah.
give 6, I would. Yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Lou Moore, Prof. Lou Moore on the socials.
Yeah, anything. You look that up, I'll be there. Yeah.
You'll find him. The book's The Great Black Hope. It's really great. Check out any of his books, but especially this one. Certainly relevant in this day and age. Thanks again, Lou, for joining us on the show.
All right, thanks.
And for our listeners, thanks for listening. Tarlin, always a pleasure. We had a guest. Look at us, moving up in the world. Subscribe, tell your friend, do all the good things. This is Running It Back.